It's Song Talk Radio.
Welcome to Song Talk Radio. This is a show with songwriters talking to other songwriters about the craft of songwriting. We share tips, tools, and techniques, and together we all become better at writing songs. I'm your host, Neil Modi, and with me, my co-host, Phil Emery. How are you doing, Phil?
I am very excited. The Spratt Emery household got two new additions today. We got a couple of kittens. Mm-hmm. So they have been slowly destroying our home, and our place smells like cat poo now. So that's
oh my goodness.
So that's real fun.
Welcome to the world of pet ownership. Good for you.
Yes.
Great. And please send your comments and questions and cat poop cleanup tips to Song Talk Radio on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or feedback at songtalk.ca for the email, and we'll share your thoughts on the show. And please visit songtalk.ca to see the show post for this episode, to find links to things we mention, and to download lyric and chord sheets to follow along with the songs we feature. And before we get to the meat of today's show, we love getting emails from our listeners, and we're happy that we got a couple of emails back from our listener episodes for our songwriting challenge that has pretty much come to an end now, but it's been going on for the last several months. Our challenge this year was to write a song based on the title, Why Do You Cry? And the last episode we did of our listener songs, we had some replies after we published that episode from a couple of the songwriters who submitted songs for that episode. So we heard back from Andy Van. And Andy said, "Hi, Neil and Phil. Thanks for featuring my song on your podcast and also for the feedback, which was great. I realized the chords I had included were misleading. The E and D were played on the top four strings as first inversion. I think that's right. So although the G sharp and F sharp were correct guidance for the guitar chord to play, they aren't really appropriate bass notes for the tonality, if that's the right word, of the song, which was around the D and E." I don't know how much that clears up the thing. But yeah. And he also said, fair point about the title. I may go back and have another crack at the whole thing now. As it happens, although Mira Chorek and I haven't met in person, I had contacted her as she runs a songwriters roundtable here on the Sunshine Coast in Australia. So it was great to hear her awesome song also featured. We have been swapping notes since. It turns out we both know the Burlington Lakeshore west of Toronto. Thanks again, and looking forward to next year's challenge. Cheers, Andy. Yeah, thanks so much for the feedback, Andy.
That's great.
It's cool that we featured yours and Mira's song on the same episode. It was the Aussie episode.
That's right.
And speaking of Mira Chorek, we heard back from her as well. And she said, "Hi, Neil and Phil. I love listening to the episode. Thank you so much. Listening to it, I had a bit of a rock star fantasy moment hearing my song played. I could pretend that a song of mine could actually be heard on the radio." All the praise made me blush, especially Phil's comment on she knows what she's doing. I struggle with confidence, and no matter how many songs I write, I never seem to grow in a sense of my own competence, and every song feels like I'm starting from scratch, and I know nothing about songwriting at all. So it means a lot to hear that. Thank you. Sorry. I'm curious about the question of the verse and pre-chorus being real all verse, as the parts aren't contrasting enough to mark a shift from verse to pre-chorus. I'm looking forward to playing with changing the structure and seeing what this may do to the idea of what the song is and how the sections flow and fit together. I'm still sitting with the musical theater connection. It kind of freaked me out a bit. I'm keen to look at this more and understand how some of the musical or phrasing elements I've used may land in that way for listeners. If I did it, it was entirely by accident. So good to know what to avoid, perhaps, if I don't want a song to be categorized as musical theater. Could you guys do an episode on writing songs for musical theater sometime? Not a bad idea, Mira. And just to clarify that bit, that was actually my comment about her melody construction, especially in her chorus, that it kind of sounded like musical theater. I think what I really meant was it sounded kind of classical music, because it had a very kind of up and down the scale kind of movement to the melody. So, take that for what it's worth, I guess. But it's certainly not anything wrong with it. I just want to make that clear. It was actually a really, really, really cool, well-developed melody, I thought. And she goes on to say, I've renamed the song The Onion Why Do You Cry to make the layers and layers reference clearer and the I might make you cry bit. Finally, I love the suggestion to record both potential endings and sit with it for a while to give it time to listen from a distance. Super helpful. Thank you so much for the prod to write the song. It never would have existed if you haven't taken the time to reach out and ask me to ponder the prompt, why do you cry? I've had a ball listening to everyone's songs and all the different approaches every songwriter took. Inspiring and educational. Awesome, Mira. Thank you so much for me. That's great.
Now, we are actually still getting submissions.
Technically.
So I think we have to stop eventually just because we will get on to the next challenge. I think we should probably do that sooner rather than later, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that, but it's still great to get everyone sending in their songs. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and there's, maybe well, it's tough because some people listen to the podcast and they may not listen to an episode for a few weeks. So if we say it's done in 1 month and you hear like 2 days before the submission date, I don't know. Yeah, we should figure out some way of doing this. But if you're still
time travel, we just need to do time travel.
That's true. But if you are still sending songs in for the song challenge, we will listen to it and we will give you some feedback just by email. How's that?
I think that's a great idea.
Because we do appreciate the fact that you went to it, and it's nice to get feedback on our songs.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing how, like Mira was saying, all the different approaches and all the different twists and turns this whole journey has taken has been really fun and awesome. So we thank everyone who submitted their songs and everyone who listened to those episodes, because it is very instructive and very interesting and educational. In fact, to hear different answers to the same question, it's kind of a cool thing.
There's very few times when you are songwriting, because we tend to either work by ourselves or working with someone else, and we're all kind of working on the same end. It's rare to hear totally different people sort of working in parallel and coming up with totally different solutions. It's so fascinating, and it helps you understand your own process a bit more, I think.
I think for sure that was what's illuminating for me, at least, is more revelation about my own, the way I write songs and the way that I approach things, and how in the future how I'll approach things.
Yeah, that's true.
Very cool. All righty then. Okay. Tonight we're happy to have singer-songwriter Matt Zaddy with us, and here's a taste of his song, A Dear Friend.
Shows up times I least expect. Thoughts and words and deeds, or in a sermon I forget. Trying not to take it all for granted. Haven't yet. Who'd have thought we'd be without regret? And I know sometimes I can't recall exactly what was said. Simple phrase that I said to a dear friend, and I hope you know I cherish all the years and time we spent.
With a sound that seamlessly blends folk rock and modern soul, there's something for every music fan to love about singer-songwriter Matt Zaddy. A storyteller at heart, his music is filled with tales of life, love, hardship, and redemption. As someone who has shared stages with a diverse array of artists, including Kanon, Francesco Yates, and Canadian rock legends Tom Cochrane and Jim Cuddy, Matt Zaddy's intention is to connect with as many listeners as possible, regardless of any genre restrictions. During the pandemic, Matt Zaddy focused on live-streamed and pre-recorded concerts, music education, content creation in partnership with the Guitar Shop Canada, and socially distanced live performances where permitted. He also has hosted virtual online events for artists in his community and participated as an educator in seminars on arts, entrepreneurship, and home performance. Welcome to Song Talk Radio, Matt Zaddy.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. And you're talking about community building. You're based in Mississauga, just outside Toronto. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That's right.
How is the music scene out in Mississauga?
It is diverse. We have, it's one of those things that Mississauga, I don't know how much Mississauga is actually known for things, but it is, I believe, the 6th biggest city in Canada. So we have, and it is a very culturally diverse area. So we have music from all over the world, in multiple languages all the time. Like I hear music in Urdu, I hear music in Spanish and Portuguese and English and French and German. It's one of those things that there is such a wide diversity of artists in our city, and there are a handful of places, especially in the last few years, that have really helped to cultivate the grassroots music in our city. Not to mention the fact that there are some very large artists that have come out of here as well that I'm sure serve as quite the inspiration.
Right on. Yeah, it's certainly growing, and there are some great venues and great, like, even public spaces and stuff to play in, like Celebration Square and all the rest of it. Like
the city of Mississauga in the last number of years has really partnered very well with both local and larger talent for a bunch of different music series. We also have a couple of not-for-profits in the city which do a lot of great work to really shine the light on that. We have a Mississauga Arts Council, and there's also an organization called Mississauga Music, which I'm fortunate enough to be on the board for, which works very closely with the culture division of Mississauga to try to spotlight the talent within our city.
Right on.
So Matt, getting to your songwriting process, how do you start off a song? Are you a music first person, lyric first person, do it at the same time?
Everyone is different, honestly.
That's true.
I find, so I have some songs where I had a melody in my head before I had anything. I have some songs where something has happened in my life and I'll get a lyrical idea. I find that usually happens when I'm driving, which is very unfortunate. So I got to pull the car over and scribble it down. Or these days, what I'll do is I will just press record on a device and just kind of rant until my heart or my head says stop, and then go back later and put it together. Now musically, I find this is something that I find is super cool. A lot of the time, musically, I'll get ideas when I'm working out arrangements of other people's music, when I'm teaching, and some happy accident will happen. But I really did think it's just that the ideas come with time spent on the instrument more than anything else. The other thing I find sometimes, as far as the writing process, is I don't stick to one instrument. Sometimes I will write at my piano. Sometimes I'll write at my guitar. Sometimes I'll write with the ukulele in my hands. A lot of it really depends on what I'm feeling. And sometimes I'll have an idea on one instrument and I will go to the next one. In fact, that's exactly what I did with that little intro lick for A Dear Friend, the ba-da, ba-da, da, da, da. I was playing it on guitar and I loved it on guitar, but I said, I heard in my head kind of like a Bruce Hornby sort of thing. Like, like that's just the way it is. With a little, like, with the bra-da, bra-da, da, da, and I went over to my piano and I said, "Oh, this has got to start with piano doing that lick."
Right on.
Yeah, you certainly do get it's amazing how a piece of music can change when you go from one instrument to another.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, totally, there's that song. One of my favorite songs by one of my favorite songwriters, Neil Finn, of Crowded House.
Yeah,
and he wrote "Don't Dream It's Over." And he actually, to me, which sounds like very much like a guitar.
It really does, yeah.
Yeah, but he actually wrote it on piano.
Really?
And he wrote it because he was annoyed that he was trying to work on music and they had a whole bunch of companies showing up. And if you look at the lyrics now, you kind of go, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." But it's interesting, something that sounds so guitarish.
It's funny. It's funny you say that, because I actually like taking piano songs and arranging them for guitar. Like I have this really kicking arrangement of "Rich Girl" by Hall & Oates that I turned into a fingerstyle guitar arrangement. So for a long time, because just based on the guitarist's history, there's a lot of music that was some other kind of instrument that could do chordal stuff like a harpsichord or a piano. A lot of that music has been taken to guitar. Some of the most famous Bach pieces for harpsichord were transcribed to guitar. There's a composer that I really, really like named Albanese, who's some of the best stuff for classical guitar was written for piano. And I have a memory when I first learned to play one of these very famous songs. That has two names, either Asturias or Leyenda, depending on what you've heard. That one's like, it's a very, very famous song. And one of my high school music teachers had to play that song on xylophone because she was a percussion major. And because it has the same layout as a piano, she had to do it with 4 mallets to be able to pull it off. Which is so cool, right?
I've seen people do that. I don't know how they do that.
I love it. It's like this weird kind of push and pull thing you do with your fingers to change the distance between the 2 mallets. I love it. It's just, to me, it's like sorcery.
I've often heard, especially from singer-songwriters whose primary instrument is the guitar and the piano is very much secondary to them, that when they hop on the piano, something really different comes out. Like it's not a matter of I played this on guitar and I want to hear it the same melody on piano, but they just try to compose on the piano and something really pure and simple comes out. Whereas if they jump onto their primary instrument, the guitar, it can sometimes get maybe too complicated or maybe too busy or maybe too. Do you have a not a favorite necessarily, but are you more proficient on one or the other?
I've played piano for longer, but I haven't worked on it as hard as I have on guitar. I'm definitely a better guitar player. I teach piano a lot because I have a good, theoretical knowledge of it. But I sit down at the piano to challenge myself sometimes because I can play. On guitar, I can improvise and I can change my voicings on the spot. On piano, because I was more classically trained than jazz trained, I work at that a fair amount. But I find on piano, because it's a linear instrument, your ideas tend to come a little bit simpler than it does on an instrument like guitar, just because it's layered differently.
Huh. Yeah, and it has like the bass and the treble kind of separated, I think, with the left and right hands. It certainly does with me. But I actually play piano like because I didn't know how to play piano, so I just took guitar chords and put them on piano. So I just have I do like a root and then a fifth on the left hand and then chords
honestly
on the top,
a lot of what the left hand does on a piano, depending on what register that you're playing it, is going to be roots, fifths, octaves, maybe a root and a seventh if you're getting a little closer to middle C, just because the lower you get, the muddier it's going to get. You're not going to do much more than that anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
Like the brightness in your voicings is all, and the depth of color is always going to typically lean more into the right hand or into the treble clef, just because you can put the 1, 2, 3 and the 6 beside each other in the treble clef and it'll sound great. You do that in the bass clef and it'll sound.
Yeah, it's true actually. Which is a shame because sometimes it's fun as a bass player to do kind of wacky intervals, but very often it can be.
I find with bass players when they do that, they just have to turn their bass down to 0. Like I love doing like some of my favorite bass players play cool chordal stuff, but they typically will do it far further up the register.
Yeah.
And they will also, it's like, what was your bass at when you played that? 0. Where were your high mids at? About 8.
So what was your journey into learning about how to write songs? Because you started off classically, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes and no. I think I started writing a song from almost the first time I picked up a guitar. And as a kid I started playing piano when I was 5 or 6 and guitar when I was 13. And I have memories writing songs, instrumental songs, when I was 8 or 9 years old. And I had a reasonable understanding of theory. So I was starting to write them out by hand because there was no software that I knew of then that could do it. And I don't even think I had a computer at that age. So I up until even the last 5 years, I did all my charting by hand. When I was a teenager and I picked up a guitar, I still remember the first riff that I wrote. It's like ingrained in my skull. Lyrically, I think I was just like a lot of teenagers, just trying to figure out life. And I started writing lyrics to the songs. And, my generation, we listened, I was an Alice in Chains and a Soundgarden guy. So it was, dark and, alt rocky.
Angsty.
Yeah, angsty. Yeah, there was definitely some of that. And I ended up getting very, very heavy into the metal and hardcore. So it definitely got angstier and more aggressive. But I think it was in me to do. Songwriting was something that came out of me, whether I wanted it to or not. And I find I'm a better person when I do it because I'm taking the thoughts that are in me and I'm taking the emotions that are in me and I'm channeling them into something. So I find that doing it for me is a necessary part of my life.
Are you writing every day?
No, I find a lot of what when I write, it's a combination. It's usually 4 circumstances of when I write. I would love to be writing every day. Life just seems to get in the way sometimes. I know a lot of people during the pandemic wrote like crazy. I didn't because I didn't qualify for CERB or any of the things there. So what I did was I ramped up my teaching like crazy to the point where I was doing at the height of the pandemic 60 private lessons a week.
Oh,
That's
wow.
emotionally and it's emotionally and intellectually exhausting. So I didn't have any juice left to write with.
Yeah. Certainly that. But your current stuff is certainly not as angsty as you described. Maybe that you were writing years ago. Was that a switch, or was that kind of a gradual change?
Well, I was going to say, with age comes wisdom, right?
Yeah.
Well, I found I still actually have I still write metal when the vibe is there.
Oh.
But my perspective is different from when I was younger. When I was younger and I was writing really, really aggressive, angular, dissonant music, it was sort of just very stream of consciousness writing, where it was just kind of flowing out of me. With what I'm writing now, I find a lot of it is almost like an internal dialogue, where I'm sort of figuring out what's going on in my life and sort of exploring things a little bit more introspectively. I always listened to and wrote music like I do now, even when I was doing mostly metal and hardcore. It's just that you can only do so many projects well at a time. And if you take on too many, then it's just one of those things where the art will suffer. So in my case, because with the last major band I was in, that was in the metal side of things, it was, I was not only, the main songwriter, but I was also our booking agent, our manager. I negotiated our record deal. I booked our tours. Like it was a lot. And, it just, I didn't have anything left. Now, when that project ended, I actually had no idea what I was going to do. I thought I was going to write a solo metal record, but I had an acoustic guitar in my hands a lot. I was hosting a couple of local, like, open mic night type events. And these songs just started flowing out of me. All these thoughts about what I had done in the last 10 years and where my life had been had really become, I had something to say. And that's what my first record became, was very much that.
I want to ask about how, with your classical background, this might sound a bit odd, but how are you notating your songs? Like you say, you actually write them out. I'm really stupid because I don't write anything out. I keep it all in my head, which means if I fall down and hit my head, I'm screwed. But you had mentioned that you write it down. Are you actually writing it? Are you notating it, or are you just doing like lyrics with chords on top? Or
typically, if like for my bandmates, I write lead sheets, so it'll have, I don't typically write out the vocal melodies for them. It'll just be I'll have some kind of a recording that I'm doing, or that will accompany a lead sheet as a reference, or it will have, if there's a specific melody I want somebody to play, I will put it into the chart. Like when I wrote out the chart for A Dear Friend, which I'm happy to send you guys, by the way, I notated out that piano melody going, but just what the right hand is doing, because the left hand, I would use, I guess it would have been, if I think about what it would have been, I would have been B flat, F over A, G minor 11 to an F. You know what I mean? In terms of the progression going down, it's kind of like a bum, 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 bum with the bass line, and then, chord, and then chordally where it seemed to work well with the melody. That was actually the first part that I wrote for the song, was that little riff there.
So when you say a lead, like you're actually writing like on staff, like for piano, and then for guitars you would write it in tablature or whatever.
No, I wouldn't. I'm the only guitar player in my band, so I don't write out my parts like that. When I would write these out, what I would end up doing is I would write it out more like a lead sheet fashion. So it's more just like the chords listed with the structure of the song. In fact, I could probably actually, if you guys like, I could even bring up the lead sheet so you can see what it looks like.
Yeah, sure.
Let me flip this camera around and I'll show you. So when my band is looking at this, I'll try to get it so it works well with the window size as well here. When my band is looking at it, that's what they're looking at.
Wow, the dots and flags. Cool.
You got time changes in there. I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, the intro is so smooth, you don't notice that the time change is happening there when it does the bra-da-da. But when I was in the studio with my producer, we decided, is like, you know what, that sounds really cool with a beat cut. That was one of those things that it felt so natural to do We just did it. But if you listen to the outro where the guitar plays the melody, instead of it just going bra-da-da-bra-da, it'll go ba-da-da-ba-da-da-ba, and it'll kind of complete the melody. Whereas in the intro, it felt so natural to cut the beat. It was just something we both kind of agreed on and said, "Oh, that's cool."
Nifty.
Yeah. I also come from a background of odd time signatures with the music that I write. Like for the metal that I wrote, it was very prog metal, angular, dissonant stuff that where a song could have 15 different time signatures in it.
So after you wrote that little ditty on piano, guitar, whatever, what was the next step with that? Do you then shift gears and think about the lyrical content, or do you finish writing like a chord progression, or what's usually the next step? Because that's historically been the thing. Like I've got a library full of these little snippets of musical bits from years ago that's kind of where it stopped. I mean, I don't do that anymore, but
I get it.
That's always the case.
That all sounds like very familiar territory.
Yeah.
With this song, I wrote that little ba-da-da-da, which to me kind of felt sort of James Taylor-y. You know what I mean? That was sort of the vibe that I got from that. And I was actually in the middle of recording this album, and I wanted to come in with a few more songs. So I sat down with this one little notebook that a friend of mine gave me, 20 years ago, that I scribble in whenever I have lyrical ideas. And I was thinking about the friends that I didn't see as often anymore. And I picked up my guitar. And the chord progression, when I hear this chord progression, it actually reminds me of that Elton John song, Your Song, because it has that, it has the, what do you call it? It has the dominant, but I played it on the third beat, so it feels like it's going to the relative minor when it goes to the sixth then. So the term for it is escaping me right now. It is no, it's like it ends up feeling like a 5-1 in the relative minor, but the word for it when you use a dominant in the place that isn't on the fifth, I forget. Just the term for it is escaping me right now.
I'm sure someone one of our listeners will let us know.
I'm sure somebody's screaming it right now.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. But I'm typing it into my search engine here because it's going to bother me. This whole call is going to bother me. It's like a dominant substitution where you can use the dominant in different places where it'll feel better. Like you'll have sometimes you'll be on the root and then you'll turn the root into like a dominant seventh chord, and you go to the fourth and it feels very natural because going from when you have that on the root with as a dominant seventh chord, it makes it feel like the five. And then when you're going to the four, it makes you feel like you're going to the root of if the four was the root.
Is that like an inverse harmony, or remember I told you about this, Phil, about that pyramid, music theory iceberg video on YouTube, and you talked about negative harmony. Negative harmony was the term that he used for like a substituted cadence, or a substituted dominant to bring it back.
Yeah, the term itself is it's going to come to me at the middle of this call, and I'm just going to blurt it out. It's just I'm having a brain fart moment here, if you will.
Yeah. So you're talking about that, and you use that in the song that's coming up, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, in a dear friend. Like what I do is because normally, if you're playing diatonically, the third is a minor chord. Yeah. But I turn the third into a dominant seventh chord, and then when it goes to the sixth, that's what it would do. Because the sixth is the relative minor, you're changing the harmony slightly so that it makes it a little bit more interesting than just staying within the key.
What can you remember? What line that you did that on, so people can listen?
Trying not to take it off for granted and haven't yet.
Okay, so that part. So when we're listening to that, try to pay attention to that little bit of musical theory and see if you can identify it.
Right.
Basically, I'm doing an A7 chord where there should be an A minor chord.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And then when you go to the D minor, because the A7 to the D minor sounds like a 5-1 in the key of D minor. But it's not like there's a C sharp in F major. So.
Oh, cool.
So it's a very common musical device. Like if you took a song like I'm Not the Only One by Sam Smith, I think he does that in the key of E or F. And let's just take it as F, just so I can use it in the same example. It would be F, A7, D minor, B flat. So the third is normally, if you're going diatonically, minor, major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, or if you're doing, major 7, minor 7, minor 7, major 7, dominant 7th, minor 7th, half diminished. So the third is normally a minor chord or a minor 7th chord, depending on how you voice it. But if you do it as a dominant 7th chord, it goes very naturally to the sixth, which because it feels like a 5-1 in the minor key,
Oh, cool.
in the relative minor.
So is that sort of a move? Does that come naturally to you? You're just strumming your guitar, or is that something you actually have to think about theoretically?
I don't think about it theoretically. I think about it musically.
Right.
There are a handful of ways that I would typically change key within a song, and that's one of the more common ways to do it. And it's really just a very quick thing. Like you can do it in multiple places where it can feel natural, the same way that you can use diminished chords as transitional chords if you want to do like some kind of a chromatic progression. I tend to listen to music which steps out of the key a lot. That's not to say that it's always necessary, but it's the same way of having a large vocabulary. You use the right word at the right time. So I look at it as just it's just another tool to add to what you're trying to say. Yeah. I very much think of music as a language, and that to me would be, just another metaphor that you can use.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean, because I'm a big fan of that in listening and in writing as well. But I think sometimes I think about it theoretically, but I'm a piano player, so I just kind of hit the other chord, and I know it's out of key, but I like the way it sounds. So I don't know, precisely what the term would be for that necessarily.
Sure, yeah.
But, you're leading by your ear and by your experience, and
sure,
if it sounds good, it is.
Yeah. I was going to say, music has been around long enough that, for pretty much every kind of chord change that you can think of, unless you're doing something that's drastically chromatic, someone has thought of it and somebody has a name for it. Like it's the same way that we have names for all the animals, and then when we find a new animal, we name it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So, but for all of the different ways that we're going to describe these, ultimately, we're just giving it a label so that we can communicate the idea. At the end of the day, I don't care what you call it as long as it sounds good, right?
Well, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we take a listen to it now, and then we'll talk a bit more about it.
Cool. Sure. Let's do it.
Here we go.
Sentimental me shows up at times I least expect. The thoughts and words and deeds are in a sermon I forget. Trying not to take it all for granted and haven't yet. Who'd have thought we'd be without regret? And I know sometimes I can't recall exactly what was said. Simple phrase that I said to a dear friend. And I hope you know I cherish all the years and times we've spent. And you know that I still miss you and the world that we have shared. And I'm sure you know I wish you all the best of life ahead, and that you'll still be here with me in the end. Whoa, though we don't see each other as often as we've guessed, life being the way it is, who has time for friends? But when we are together, it feels like no time has passed. We can pick up right there where we left. And I know sometimes amidst it all, I falter and forget. Simple phrase that I said to a dear friend. And I hope you know I cherish all the years and times we've spent. And you know that I still miss you and the world that we have shared. And I'm sure you know I wish you all the best of life ahead, and that you'll still be here with me in the end. Oh, just know I won't forget you, and and all the times we've had. And maybe someday soon I will see you again. If we don't, you're in my heart and I'm in yours, I bet. A simple phrase that I said to a friend. Do my best to see you. Do my best to see you. I'll do my best to see you, dear friend. And I hope you know I cherish all the years and times we've spent. And you know that I still miss you and the world that we have shared. And I'm sure you know I wish you all the best of life ahead. And that you'll still be here with me in the end. In the end, in the end, in the end.
What a great tune.
Thank you very much.
Great
Yeah, I
stuff.
switched off the screen there for a split second because I was looking up that term. It's called a secondary dominant.
A
Secondary dominant.
Ha, gotcha.
Yeah, it's where you use the dominant in a place to naturally lead the chord progression in a specific direction, which will typically make it go down a fifth or up a fourth, so it feels like you're doing a 5-1. Because for whatever reason, our ears respond the most to 5-1 chord changes. That's just, our ears just want to hear that. It's the most popular chord change in Western music. And if you put a 5 chord somewhere, you will always be able to go to whatever will be the one, a perfect fifth away from that, down, or a perfect fourth above it, always, and it will always sound correct.
Yes. Yeah.
So, if you were on the root and you wanted to go to the fourth, but you wanted it to feel a little bit more interesting, if you're playing a C, play a C dominant 7th chord and then go to that F chord, it just feels like it should be that way.
yeah. The pull is so strong. It's just
exactly, like it's just pulling you in that direction. And a lot of the great songwriters that I like use a lot of secondary dominance. Like there's like if you were to take them like Paul Simon or someone like Elton John or someone like Billy Joel, or any of the really good like folk writers in general, I find that's a very common tool that is just so effective. You just got to do it.
Yeah. And it is very smooth, right?
Yeah, that's it. It doesn't feel like a massive amount of dissonance that's going on.
No. Or an awkward change or anything.
It's like, oh, there's no, obviously there's no C sharp in an F major, but it can feel very natural if you do it in a certain way, because our ears are also drawn to the relative minors of various keys. So, if you play into the relative minor, you're fine. It's why a lot of the time, if you're playing in a minor key, you can get away with having the flat 7 or having the natural 7, just because both of them can feel very natural.
Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about the progression from the verse to the for the pre-chorus to the chorus, especially in terms of keys or chords, like, because there is a lift to the chorus. It kind of takes off. Very nice, and the pre-chorus ends up in a different place. And especially we were talking about the third line of your verse before we played the song, but I'm finding the third line of your chorus to be a really interesting chord change. I don't know if it's the same.
The same chord change.
It's the same secondary dominant type of thing, because that's a really, it is noticeable, but again, it's smooth and it's clean and it's
it's actually the exact same secondary dominant. I'm doing an A7 to the D minor 7 there, so it's the same. At least I believe I am. Is my brain working right? Give me a second here.
Check your lead sheet.
Yeah. Well, I'm like, because when I played on guitar, I wrote it in the position for D major, but that didn't work best for my voice. So we experimented moving it around the capo around the neck, because the voicing sounded right like that, but it was too low for my voice. So we ended up finding, 3 semitones up seemed to work the best. That's why it ended up in F. Like I wrote it in D position and thinking in like a D major position for guitar, but F was the key that suited my vocal range.
But you sang it in D when you wrote it in D?
Well, yeah, but I mean that doesn't mean that I can perform it nearly as well. Sonically, it feels better in F in my voice.
Okay, fair enough.
So in my head, I'm transposing when I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if I'm looking at the chart, I can say, "Oh yeah, that's totally an A7 to a D minor 7." But in my brain, I'm thinking F sharp 7 to B minor 7.
Right. So is the chord progression in the chorus is the same as it is in the verse then?
Not entirely. No, it's similar. But that secondary dominant is the same. Like in the chorus actually has a very similar chord progression to the intro. It's like the B flat, F over A, G minor 7, and then to an F chord. And then there's a little kind of like dun 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 dun. There's almost like a walking bass where we made a little 2-5-1, and then a 1/3 to make that progression work right. In the second time through the chord change in the chorus, and the third time we do the B flat to an F over A, and then we do the secondary dominant A7 to D minor 7. So the chord progressions in this song, minus the pre-chorus, because it is noticeably different.
Yeah.
The verse and the chorus share a lot, but there's enough differentiation in there where they feel different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, because for your chorus, just regardless of the theory of musical theory, your chorus still needs to have generally a lift. I think people like to have fifths. I mean, we should do a show actually on choruses that actually have a drop, because some of them do have drops. But I think most people, especially modern, they want you to have a lift on the chorus.
Yeah. I was going to say a very good example of a chorus that drops is Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen.
Yes.
Like that, and like it can work. It just typically doesn't.
It's
like most choruses are higher point, not necessarily the highest point, because that may come in the bridge.
Yeah.
But it is a much higher point than the verses, and it's got to be. I agree with you 100%. Like it can work without it, but it's not always. It doesn't work as often.
It's a little bit. It's more of a challenge, and it's not to say that you can't do it. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, but I think sometimes people will do things because they know it's going to work.
Yeah. It was funny, actually. I was on holidays with my wife this summer, and one of the things that we did while we were away was she was reading one of these books written by one of these guys that writes, really, he's a songwriter for a living. So a lot of the time, you're going to have these things that that will always work, and you can experiment outside of them. But it's the same way that I don't approach typically my songwriting with theory in mind. But if I'm stuck, I'll go into the toolbox. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. We talked about a while back on the podcast, talked about Penny Lane, Beatles' Penny Lane, and that's an example where the chorus lifts, but the key change is like it steps down a semitone or something like that.
Yeah. There's actually a lot of out there about directions of chord changes in terms of if they tend to get brighter or darker in terms of the direction you're going. And a lot of people would say, depending on the direction of the cycle of fifths you're going in, if you're changing keys, it can make something sound brighter or darker.
Yes.
Well, that's a good point, actually.
We talked about that. We did a whole show on the circle of fifths a while back, and we talked specifically about that, where especially if you want the bridge examples we used, the bridge was much brighter, and in both examples it was going to a sharper key signature.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you would expect, 100%.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, speaking of bridges, although you have certainly a dynamic break, you don't actually have a bridge, I don't think, do you?
Yeah, you have a solo.
Not in this song. Actually, this one was a funny one. I remember when I brought this song to my producer, I didn't even have a pre-chorus when I went in with this. I had a really strong verse and a really strong chorus and a nice little instrumental bit. And what the bridge basically is an elaboration on the intro in this song. But I ended off on a much darker sound. Like there's that diminished chord sound at the end there. It's like I have it notated as a C7 flat 9 over D flat.
Oh, geez.
but it's like when you listen to it, it sounds like it's supposed to be a point of tension. That was the idea of it, was to bring the song up to that point and then bring it back into the verse. That was the idea.
Is that the moment just before the quiet verse?
Yeah, like where you hear the 3-part harmony that's like,
Yeah.
That's right before it goes back into the third verse where the words go, just know I won't forget you. And we also brought the instrumentation way down there in the arrangement as well. So it's mostly just guitar coming back in.
Which which serves sort of the way like a bridge was, a bridge would. It kind of cleanses the palate, then it sets it up for your big end chorus.
Totally. Yeah, I'm with you on that, 100%.
Yeah, it's a great tune. Did you go through a bit of a journey, like when you're writing this, in terms of discovering anything, or is it just sort of using your tools that you've known all these years?
I find that the writing process in general is a journey for me. When I think about the songs that were the last ones that I wrote for this record, almost all of them are the ones that were the most well received. So I think that my writing actually progressed through the album. Now, I like them all, but I like them all for different reasons and for different things about them. But the last 3 or 4 songs that I wrote on it, 3 of the most popular songs on the record were the last ones I wrote. And this was one of the ones near the tail end of the session that I had finished up. Which is kind of cool.
What do you think it is about these ones that have resonated?
I think I'm finding my groove or my style as a songwriter a little bit better. I think there's a bunch of tunes on the record, like some of them tend to lean more into like a folk feel or folk rock feel. Some of them tend to lean more into a rhythm and blues feel. And I have had the ones that tend to go over better are not one or the other. It's just a matter of the feel of the song. So I think in general, more than anything else, when I was in this session with the producer I was working with, we found a really good groove, and it led the writing in a natural direction.
What was it about working with a producer that convinced you the pre-chorus was a good idea for the song then?
A lot of the time I find most songwriters would do well to work with a producer because they're coming to it objectively and they can challenge you to make the songs better. Like I've worked with some producers that just say, yep, we just want to get, make sure everything is heard as well as possible. Right. But I like the kind of producers who will challenge you to improve your writing. And the last producer I worked with, his name is Ross Citrullo. He runs a studio called RHC Music in Toronto. He challenged me in the best way possible. And it was interesting because by the end of our sessions, we were both so on the same page. He's like, yeah, I wouldn't change a damn thing. But it made me a better writer because he made me contemplate things I would not have otherwise considered. The whole 2 heads are better than one thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And production is a skill set. Songwriting is a skill set, but most of the time, the versions of songs that are started out, especially for anything close to mainstream or close to like a higher value production, are the start of it. The way it started out is nowhere near the way that it finished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like if you listen to like someone like John Mayer talk about the process of where some of those songs started and where they ended up is very different. Like I remember I was watching an interview he did where he was talking about the song "Daughters," which is an acoustically led song. It wasn't when it started. Yeah. So, things can change over time in terms of what feels right. And sometimes people will write, 2 or 3 different arrangements of a song for an experiment to see what feels best for the tune. I'm sure that we've all heard renditions of songs that we liked better than the originals. Along the Watchtower is a great example.
Yeah.
A lot of people would argue that if you want to think of like something a little bit more modern, Marilyn Manson redoing "Sweet Dreams," very different take on that song, but so cool.
No, I hated it.
But
I loved it personally. Like I love both versions. But how about this one? Did you ever hear how A Perfect Circle took Imagine and put it in a minor key?
Oh no, I haven't heard about that.
It is so haunting. It is haunting.
I would imagine it would be.
Yeah. But it worked, and it worked in such a way that it changed the landscape of the song that it felt like it was the theme music to the apocalypse, as opposed to the theme music for hope.
For hope, yeah, you'd think.
Well, and of course, the famous story is of a last Midnight Train to Georgia. It was actually written as Midnight Plane to Houston. Because he was actually writing it about Farrah Fawcett. He was going out with Farrah Fawcett at the time. And like, what a terrible title for a song. Like it doesn't sound, but it made sense to him. But
it's one of those things that's typically you only see the final version, right? Yeah. It's like you don't see the painter's duds.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, you don't see the many drafts and the many versions.
And it's interesting too, because lyrically, when I write, a lot of the time what I write is closer to prose than anything else. And then to make it work for the song, you have to serve the song. And you know what? Some lyrics ain't going to make it. No matter how good they were, if you were reading it on a piece of paper, that doesn't mean it's going to work in the song. You have to serve the song.
Yeah, has to sing well, and it has to have
the phonetics have to be, phonetics have to be right for melody. Otherwise, it's no good.
Yeah.
Well, and it's something I've always told, in my own discussions with friends, is that, there's a long time where there's people who wrote songs, there's people who wrote lyrics, and they got together and they wrote these songs and they put them out. They didn't perform them. They just sat in these rooms like Tin Pan Alley, and you had a composer and a lyricist, and they'd churn out these songs. And then you had people who sang, and the singers didn't write songs; they sang and they performed them. Yeah. That was their job,
Yeah, and that's depending on what genre you're in, or depending on what music scene you find yourself in, one can be more common than the other. Like if you're a folk singers, most of them write their own songs, but not all of them. Think about how many songs Carole King wrote for other people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a great example. Yeah. Or like I think about people in a genre like pop music back in the day. I mean, think about all the Motown stuff. Oh yeah. It wasn't written by the singers.
No, they were written by like songwriters, and they were just, and then they had a producer on top of it. Totally. It was, and even the the Beach Boys didn't even play most of those tracks. It was studio guys, and they would come in and do the, so there's nothing wrong with teaming up with people who know how to do stuff better than you do.
No, certainly not. And but these days, people tend to wear many different hats, right? So if you partition yourself into I'm just a songwriter, or I'm just a performer, or I'm just whatever, then unless you are working with other people, if you're trying to do everything yourself, then you have to be able to say, okay, I've done the first draft inspirational version of my song. Now I need to put on my editor hat. And really, and like you say, as if you're working with a producer. Now, what would a producer say about this song, and how would they try to improve it? And you need to put on that hat, and then you need to put on your recording engineer hat, and then you need to put on your performer hat, and then a lot of the DIY stuff.
It's a man with many hats. I completely understand.
Yeah,
I find like if I was I wouldn't drum on my own record, but I mean, I have an idea about the grooves that I want, and I could probably sequence it okay, but I'm not going to do what my drummer is going to do. I won't have the nuance that he has. You know what I mean? Yeah. And you were right about the songwriter thing. I mean, especially in pop music, it's still industry standard that most pop singers don't write their own songs. Like I have a wonderful friend of mine that is a songwriter in LA that is from my town. I'm sure you're familiar with the band Magic. Mm-hmm. The guitar player, Mark Pelly, we've known each other since we were kids. Mm-hmm. He's written for like Shakira and Chris Brown and all kinds of other people. Mm-hmm. And that's one of his skill sets, is as a songwriter. He's a session guitar player. Obviously he has Magic as a thing, but he's also, and he's a producer as well. So you will find most people I know in the industry, if they ended up, they usually have a number of different things that they do. And then if one of those things ends up being the thing that either they're really good at, or the thing that pays them the best, it tends to be the one that gets worn the most, or the hat that gets worn the most. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's very true. So is there something that you've come through your own songwriting journey? Is there some bit of knowledge that you wish you knew when you started?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of things I could say that I wish I knew.
That's the biggest thing.
More than anything right now, I would say don't be afraid to bounce your ideas off other people. A lot of the time, we can get really, really invested in emotionally invested in the song itself, and then we're stubborn and refuse to change in ways that could make it better. We get locked in, so to speak, where we're unwilling. Like I remember the first session I had with Ross. We were working on my last record, and he was poking and prodding this to me about it. I was so uncomfortable. Because I had the song for 2 years, so I had heard it a certain way for a long time. And a lot of the time when you go into the studio, unless you're somebody who's churning out tunes all the time regularly, you're used to something a certain way. It's hard to change, but sometimes you got to trust the people that you're working with and say, okay, maybe they're hearing something I'm not. Be willing to try different things. Be willing to listen to other people's opinions about things, especially people where that's their job. Like, you don't have to agree about everything. Like, I know there are times where I was super adamant about something, and I'm really glad it ended up the way that it was. But there were other times, like that pre-chorus there in A Dear Friend, that was written in the studio.
Mm.
And then the chopping of that beat in the intro, that happened in the studio. We got into, we had some great chemistry going that day. And he said, can you try this? And then I tried it. I was like, oh, that's perfect. And it's so subtle. You don't notice it because it feels so natural.
Mm-hmm. Those are the best special effects, ones you don't notice.
Yeah.
Totally. It's like when there's key changes that are so smooth, you don't even realize it's happened. Like there was this one band I remember when I was growing up, because like I said, I listened to a lot of proggy metal. There was this band named Candiria that had this one song that was the smoothest 7/4 I'd ever heard in my life. And it was so smooth, I didn't even realize it was an odd time signature. And I said, that's how you know you did it right.
I've always felt that. I love a lot of outsider weird music and stuff, and I love complicated music, but I think it should never sound complicated. Like, it should just sound like a great piece of music, And it's like,
Totally.
Salisbury
Hill.
Yeah. That's in what, 13/6 or something?
7/4.
7/4. No, it's not 7/4. It's something
7/4.
else.
I promise you it's in 7/4.
Pretty sure it's in
Listen to the drummer.
7/4.
7/4.
Now I'm going to go listen, but I'm pretty sure it's in 7/4.
7/4?
It's in 7/4, but he does an interesting thing in the intro. It's like 4 + 3, and then when he hits the verse, it's like 3 + 4, or reverse.
And there's many
the
ways that you
emphasis
can
shifts, but it's still 7/4.
Well, that's it. And there's many ways that you can do that when you're doing odd, because a lot of the time what odd time signature groups end up being is it feels like two different groupings. It's very rare that it feels like a single grouping all the way through. Mm-hmm. Like if you were to listen to Mission Impossible, it feels like 3 and 2, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the reasons why Take 5 is still being played to this very day, because it is one of those odd time signatures that just grooves.
100%. And it's a real challenge for a lot of people to listen to music that isn't groove based. Like, we all want to move to the music. Like, most of the music I wrote in my 20s, not very groovy. It was very pattern based, very angular, very sporadic, which is an acquired taste. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, certainly not.
Yeah, like what I write nowadays is a heck of a lot more head nodding. You know what I mean?
That's true.
Alrighty.
Well,
I think there's the band. I think it's all the time we have on Song Talk Radio. Special thanks to Matt Zaddy. Awesome stuff there, Matt.
Great stuff, man.
Where can our listeners find out more about your music and hear some more of your stuff?
Sure. Easiest way is just to Google Matt Zaddy. So Matt, like I expect to spell it, and Zaddy is like daddy, but with a Z at the front.
Perfect.
Yeah. And if you go to mattzaddy.com or anything, or you search me on any platform, my name pops up real quick.
Yep, and certainly check out the show post on songtalk.ca. We will link to Matt's website and his other socials on there as well, so you can always find it there as well. So we want to hear from you, our listeners. So please send in your comments, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at Songtalk Radio, or send us an email at feedback@songtalk.ca. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel for live performance videos and full episodes. Subscribe today to the Song Talk Radio podcast on your favorite podcast provider, and don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter at songtalk.ca. You can find links to all the products, books, and web services we mentioned on the show on our resources page on the website. And wherever you are in the world, please join us online via Zoom at our next monthly Song Talk meetup. It's free to join on Meetup and free to attend the meetup. Bring a song and a lyric sheet and get constructive feedback from other songwriters. Stop by songtalk.ca for the link. You can follow me at neilmodi.com. You can follow Phil at
philemery.ca.
And Matt, what's your favorite go-to social media channel?
I don't really have. I say Instagram or Facebook, one or the other.
One or the other? Perfect.
Well, I mean, I probably spend more time on YouTube just because I want to look and listen, but for actual socializing, it would be one of those two.
Right on. Okay. Perfect. And thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to stop by the website, songtalk.ca, to browse past shows and find out how you can be a guest. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and keep on writing.
Good night, everyone.